students, welcome to the lecture on accounting for share capital, and after this lecture we will be able to learn the following objectives. Understand shares, its types and nature, explain accounting for share capital, discuss accounting treatment of forfeiture and reissue of shares, know the differences between shares and debentures, discuss disclosure of share capital in companies' balance sheet only. Let us first understand what a company is. A company form of organization is a third stage in the evaluation of forms of organization. Its capital is contributed by a large number of persons called shareholders who are the real owners of the company. But neither it is possible for all of them to participate in the management of the company, nor considered desirable. Therefore, they elect a board of directors as a representative to manage the affairs of the company. In fact, all the affairs of the company are governed by the provisions of the Companies Act 1956. A company means a company incorporated or registered under the Companies Act 1956 or under any other earlier Companies Act. According to Chief Justice Marshall, a company is a person, artificial, invisible and intangible and existing only in the eyes of law. Being a mere creation of law, it possesses only those properties which the charter of its creation confers upon it, either expressively or as incident to its very existence. A company usually raises capital in the form of shares called share capital and debentures debt capital. This lecture deals with accounting for share capital of companies.
Share capital are funds raised by issuing shares in return for cash or other considerations. The amount of share capital a company has can change over time because each time a business sells new shares to the public in exchange for cash, the amount of share capital will increase. Share capital can be composed of both common and preferred shares. Share capital is also known as equity financing. The amount of share capital a company reports on its balance sheet only accounts for the initial amount for which the original shareholders purchased the shares from the issuing company. Any price differences arising from price appreciation or depreciation as a result of transactions in the secondary market are not included.
Let us learn what is share and share capital. The total value of a company's share is called its share capital. Shares are either usually held in public limited companies or private limited companies. These share gives a member certain rights. For example, may give a right to a dividend and voting rights within the company. The nature of those rights depend on the class of share and what has been specified in the Articles of Association. A minimum of one share must be issued at incorporation, and a company can alter the value of the share capital, issue further shares and cancel shares, although the latter can be difficult. Allotment of shares refers to when a person acquires a right to be a shareholder by the board and has a contractual right to the shares, but he is not yet a shareholder. Issued share capital refers to the process whereby a shareholder takes share in a company, and this is complete once they are registered as a shareholder, which then allows them to exercise the rights associated with these shares. Companies can issue shares on the basis of that payment will be taken and called for at a later date. This is either known as called up or uncalled up share capital. The total value of all paid share is called paid up share capital, although most shares are generally issued fully paid. To understand the topic of shares properly, you must understand the nature and types of shares. Nature of shares. The shares of the company are movable property, transferable in the manner provided by the AOA. Shares are treated as goods. Types of shares. There are two types of shares. Equity shares. Those shares which are paid dividend only are fixed. Profits are left after the preferred shareholders have been paid at fixed rate of dividends. Shareholders have voting rights and controls. Number 2. Preference shares. when those shares which have paid a dividend at rate before any dividend is paid on the equity e-shares, and when the company is wound. Types of shares. Capital. Authorized, register or nominal capital. The maximum amount of share capital that the company is authorized by its constitutional documents to issue, allocate to shareholders. Part of the authorized capital can and frequently does remain unissued. This number can be changed by the shareholders' approval. The part of the unauthorized capital which has been issued to shareholders is referred to as the issued share capital of the company. Issued capital. The amount of nominal value of share held by the shareholders. It is the face value of the shares that have been issued to the shareholders. Issued share capital and share premium represent the amount invested by the shareholders in the company. Subscribed capital. The amount of capital for which company has received application from the general public who are interested in buying shares. If this term is too technical to be understood, then subscription is simply an application in which investor expresses his interest to buy shares in the company. Usually only that much shares are subscribed which company intends to issue later, but sometimes if company is in good shape, then more and more people will be interested in buying shares. In this case, oversubscription will be the result. But if company's financial position is not sound or due to other factors, it may be possible that subscriptions are received for lesser than intended shares, in which case they will be under subscription. Call up capital. In some jurisdiction, company is permitted to ask for only part of the total issued capital. That is, company will require shareholders to pay only part of the amount of the shares they hold and not to pay fully. The partial amount so asked by the company from the shareholders out of the total value of share is called up capital. Paid up capital. The amount of capital against which the company has received the payments from the shareholders so far. Reserve capital. Part of the authorized capital of a firm which has not yet called up and is available for drawing in case of need. Accounting for share capital. Issue of shares. A salient. A salient characteristic of the capital of a company is that the amount of its shares can be gradually collected in easy installments spread all over a period of time depending upon its growing financial requirement. The first installment is collected along with its application and is thus known as application money. The second on allotment and the remaining installment are termed as first call, second call, and so on. The word final is suffixed to the last installment. However, this in no way prevents a company from calling the full amount on share right at the time of application. There is also a concept called private placement of shares. When a company issues financial securities such as shares and convertible securities to a particular group of investors, it is known as private placement. There are mainly two kinds of private placement of shares: preferential allotment and qualified institutional placement. Under the preferential allotment, a listed company issues securities to a select group of entities which may be institutions or promoters at a particular place. Investors may have a locked-in period. Recently, the SEBI eased the norms of preferential allotment to help revive Satyam computers. Usually, for a preferential allotment, companies are required to take permission of shareholders. Qualified institutional placement is another way to go for private placement, under which a listed company issues shares or convertibles to institutional buyers only, as per the provisions mentioned in Chapter 13A of SEBI DIP guidelines. This process was introduced in 2006 to provide listed companies a new window to raise funds from the domestic market rather than going to foreign markets.
In this video, we have listed the pros and cons of the private placement industry. This will allow you to see if private placement is right for you or not. To start, let's name some of the pros associated with private placement programs. Number 1. possible high yields. In private placement, you can get higher yields than you would ever expect. In addition, there are predetermined contracts with buyers which will minimize risk for bank instrument traders and their investors. Number 2. Privately multiply money. If you are someone with high net worth, it is always nice to profit in a private setting. Unlike public investments, private investing can protect the interests and the information of the investor while they grow their wealth. Number 3. Funding large projects. If you are a wealthy investor with projects, private placement is a great way to achieve your goals. In fact, project funding is the main point of private placement investments. If you're an investor with at least $100 million in liquid assets, you could be funding billion-dollar projects in no time. Number 4. No risk if real trader. If a private placement trader is real, he will have a contractual commitment with someone to purchase their bank instrument at a higher value. Without this predefined commitment, the private placement trader will not even purchase the instrument from the bank. In short, the contract with the commitment holder eliminates all risk for the trader. Lastly, number 5. You will meet most powerful in world. There is a very small circle of successful people in the private placement business, and most of them are immensely wealthy. If you are lucky enough to find a real private placement deal, you could become connected with some of the most powerful people in the world. This could include those with political ties and other connections that could benefit you in the future.
There's generally 2 types of subscription, that is oversubscription of shares and undersubscription of shares. In case the application received from the public for the shares and less than the application invited from the public, it is called the undersubscription of the shares. If the number of shares applied for by the public is more than the number of shares offered, it is the case of oversubscription. When the shares are oversubscribed, the company cannot justify all the applicants. In such a situation, the board of directors must set a criterion for allotment of shares. The directors for allotment of shares can use one of the following 3 options. Full amount can be made to some application while totally rejecting the others. Allotment can be made on pro rata basis. Pro rata allotment means allotment in proportion of shares applied for. Combination of the above 2 options. Let us now know what this calls in advance and arrears mean. Calls in advance refer to the amount paid by the shareholders even before the company makes the particular call due. A company may accept the calls in advance only when the articles permit so and when the amount called up by the company but not yet paid by the shareholder is called calls in arrears. Issues of shares for consideration other than in cash can be made for any of the following consideration: acquisition of the asset of other company, acquisition of shares of other company, acquisition of technical know-how, other purposes. An important aspect to remember when issuing shares for consideration other than cash is valuation. When one refers to valuation in this context, it means valuation of the shares and valuation of the services or asset on the basis of which such shares were allotted. While typically in startups, valuation of shares are not required as usually they are allotted at face value. Valuation of services or assets is important as that will determine the number of shares which are to be allotted. As these shares will be issued through a preferential allotment, a special resolution of the board and the shareholders will also be required. If they are investors in the company, it is important therefore to bring them on board before issuing such shares. Accounting treatment of forfeiture and reissue of shares. Shares are fortified because only a part of the due amount of such shares is received and the balance remains unpaid. On forfeitures, the membership of the originals allotted is cancelled. He or she cannot be asked to make payment of the remaining amount. Such shares become the property of the company. Therefore, company may sell these shares. Such a sale of shares is called reissue of shares. Thus, reissue of shares means issue of fortified shares. Once the board of directors has fortified the shares, the defaulting shareholder is asked to return the shares certified, which is cancelled thereafter. The board of directors passes a resolution allotting the fortified shares to the new purchasers of such shares. In case of reissue of shares, neither a prospectus is issued nor is any otherwise made to the general public. Though the amount of such shares may be called in more than one installment, but usually the entire amount is called in one installment, that is lump sum. The board of directors of the company, while reissuing the shares, decide the price of reissue. These shares can be reissued at par, at premium or at discount. Generally, these shares are reissued at a discount, that is at a price which is less than its nominal value. The amount of discount allowed at the time of reissue in no case should be more than the amount fortified on such shares. Question arises, at what price the fortified shares can be reissued? There is no limit of the price at which it can be reissued if price charged is more than the price of issue at the time of their forfeiture. But then there is a limit below which price cannot be charged, or we can say that there is a minimum price below which the company cannot reissue its fortified shares. We can look at it from another angle, that is, the company cannot give discount more than a particular amount while reissuing the fortified shares. The maximum permissible discount at the time of reissue of fortified share is ascertained in different situations in the following manner. Shares originally issued at par. When the shares are originally issued at par, the maximum permissible discount for reissue of shares is equal to the amount fortified on such shares. Shares originally issued at premium. In case of shares originally issued at premium, there can be two situations. Premium has not been received on the fortified shares and premium has been received on such shares. The amount fortified is the amount that has been received, including the amount of premium, if it has been received, and the maximum discount that can be allowed on reissue of such shares is the amount so fortified. Shares originally issued at discount. In this case, the actual amount received becomes a fortified amount, but the maximum permissible discount on reissue of shares will be equal to the amount fortified plus the amount of discount initially allowed on these shares at the time of their original issue. For the better understanding, you must understand the difference between shares and debentures. Shares are uniform parts of the share capital. Debentures are uniform part of the loan capital of a company. Rights, privileges, and the liabilities accompanying these instruments are different from one another. The main differences are as follows. Shareholders are owners of the company, whereas the debenture holders are creditors of the company. Therefore, while the shareholders have a multifaceted interest in the welfare of the company, the debenture holders have a very limited interest in the company, limited to receive interest on time. A shareholder is entitled to receive a dividend when there are profits. The rates of dividend varies from year to year depending upon the amount of profit. On the other hand, the debenture holders are entitled to interest at a fixed rate which the company must pay whether or not there are profits. A shareholder enjoys the right of proprietorship of a company, whereas a debenture holder can enjoy the right of a lender only. A shareholder has a right of control over the working of the company by attending and voting in the general meeting. They are able to decisively influence the composition of the board of directors and other senior management positions. The debenture holders do not have any voting right and they are unable to exercise any such influence. Let us know about disclosure of share capital in company's balance sheet only. The Companies Act requires a balance sheet to be included in the published financial accounts of all limited companies. In reality, all other organizations that need to prepare accounting information for external user will also produce a balance sheet, since it is an important statement of the financial affairs of the organization. In share capital of company, we have to show authorized capital, subscribed capital, call-up capital and paid-up capital. For calculating paid-up capital, we will deduct calls unpaid and add original paid-up amount of 45 shares. Balance sheet is a statement which is made on the basis of accounting equation. In simple accounting equation, total assets will always equal to total liabilities. Total liabilities are divided into two parts. One is outside liability and other is inside liability. Inside liability is honest capital, so we keep capital in the liability side of balance sheet. There are lots of reasons behind this which we are explaining in following points. Now in the end, let us summarize what we have learned in this lecture. A company form of organization is a third stage in the evaluation of forms in the organization. The capital is contributed by a large number of persons called shareholders, who are the real owners of the company. Two types of shares are equity shares, preference shares. Types of share capital are authorized, registered or nominal capital, issued capital, subscribed capital, called-up capital, paid-up capital, reserve capital. When a company issued financial securities such as shares and convertible securities to a particular group of investors, it is known as private placement. In case the applications received from the public for the shares are less than the application invited from the public, it is called the undersubscription of the shares. If the number of shares applied for by the public is more than the number of shares offered, it is the case of oversubscription. Shares are fortified because only a part of the due amount of such shares is received and the balance remains unpaid. On forfeiture, the membership of the original allotted is cancelled.